Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, and welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. Under the clause of you never know what to expect yet. This falls under that. Our guest today is Ken Rahjes, who is our representative for District 110 in the state of Kansas. And just a few weeks ago, there was some envelopes, 100 to be exact, that were mailed out. Representative Rahjes was one of those that received one of those envelopes that contained white powder. Ken, good to have you on our program today.
Well, Gary, as always, thanks for the time.
You know what? You get all sorts of mail correspondence, some of it, probably most of it good, some of it not so good. Have you ever had anything like this where an envelope shows up with funny white powder in it?
No, this was a first. In a previous life, I was a congressional aide when we went through that with some ricin and other things that never really got to my home, and really didn't think anything about it. But when it happened, that set off a chain of events that I wasn't sure what to expect.
Well, one thing I know is it's still under investigation, and I guess the next question is, what can you tell us about the situation as it stands today, and kind of what was the whole process when these letters first started showing up?
Well, what I can tell you right now is probably what's almost out there in the media so far is that this case has been taken over by the FBI and cased by, the everything that's happened in the state of Kansas, because while we were the first state targeted, if you will, then a couple of days later, it went to some members of the Tennessee legislature, shut down one of their buildings to kind of do an investigation. Then it also then went to, I believe, many Montana legislators at their homes. In Tennessee, I think it went to their offices. And so a little different story. And so the FBI has taken over. I have nothing but great things to say for the KBI and Director Mativi, who was on this early on. He feels confident that through their efforts and FBI efforts, we'll find out for sure who's behind this, and really curious to try to find a motive. It is one of those, Gary, if I can just go back to that day. Luckily, I was the only one home, and typically I don't get the mail. But my wife was gone, so I thought, well, I'll go out. I live out in the country, so you go out and pick up the mail and have a few bills and a few, newspapers and all the things we get. And this letter had a AGRA return address, something Kansas Avenue, which that's legitimate. We have Kansas Street in AGRA, and it was a different name though that I didn't know. But in the world we live in today, people move around a lot. So, well, could be somebody that has a concern, because we get those all the time via email, text, phone calls, even my old landline. I got a call today, somebody wanting something. So I opened it up, and because it was computer generated, name and return address all looked legit. Opened it up. It was a computer generated letter that had some, hieroglyphics maybe and some other things, and kind of like the old TV shows, where they would cut deals out, to make sentences, little letters out of the newspaper. Well, that was all printed though. And the only thing I do remember, something about, hope you don't choke on your victory or whatever. Well, yeah, okay. Who knows? The legislature had been out for several weeks. We kind of move on with our lives. And then there was another little package. It was a piece of paper with the edges, tucked in. And it did feel something, but Gary, I receive crosses. I receive those type of things, people, in support, prayer, or whatever. Normally it's not negative. And so I thought, well, okay. So I opened it up just on one corner, looked in, saw the powder. Oh, folded it back up, put it back in the envelope, set it down. I went back to work in my, my home office here. Thought, well, when I get my work done, I'll call the sheriff and say, I got something interesting in the mail. Well, about 30 minutes later, the first email comes from our speaker, Dan Hawkins. If you receive something, call the director right away. So I called. I was like number 7 that day. And then it was a long 7 or 8 hours. In fact, probably even longer than that by the time things wrapped up on that Friday.
Well, you think about that and you think of all the different possibilities could be out there in today's world. First thought when you see something like powder, mine goes back to some of that powder that was very dangerous to have. Did you ever personally feel in danger?
I didn't. When the KBI got here, the first thing they asked is how I was feeling. I think one of the early concerns was, could it be laced with something, with fentanyl or something else, or could it be something very dangerous?
Do they know what it is?
As far as the last thing we found out, they didn't say it was baby powder, but it was nothing that was harmful. That's what we did learn from all these tests. Now, some early tests maybe had different from different places, but I think in the end, that's what it was. So it didn't smell of baby powder, really anything of cornstarch or really anything. But then again, I didn't get my nose in there.
Yeah, good thinking on that. And from the standpoint of being able to take a look at those things, that arrives in the mail. Since that time, have you had any thoughts of where these letters came from? Because the way you talk about being computer generated has a local kind of connection to it. Somebody had done some work to make it look that way.
Right. I think what you'll find, and in one of your sister websites, Hayes Post had one of the Hutch lawmakers shared his letter, and it looked exactly like mine. What we kind of found while we were kind of waiting around, we just did some searches for the names, and we did some searches for the addresses, and most all the addresses were a church in our home communities. And obviously, I think to try to throw people off or to make some sort of a statement. One of the first questions that I was asked is, who might be upset with you? And so I went through, or why, and I said, well, probably based on some votes late in the session, I would guess there's 2 or 3 groups that may want to do this. And so probably that maybe they thought our guard was down because it'd been a few weeks since the session. I don't know. We don't typically think that from a citizen legislature that we would have this type of thing. And so I think I don't know exactly why whoever group or whoever person did this. But what it does, it doesn't help in the discussion. You're now a little guarded with anybody that wants to come to your office or to see you face to face. I mean, you just are, because you don't know. I mean, we're on a different level than those that are in Washington or those that are in county commission, local ones as well. I mean, we all have kind of our different level. And but that being said, Gary, I'm still going out and seeing as many constituents as I possibly can, walking in parades, doing things. This will not deter what I need to do, being a representative, an elected official, to represent the folks here in the state of Kansas.
Well, Ken, I want to, first, thanks for that work and continuing that effort. And there's been all sorts of stories out on this state representative. There are 2 parts to this. But I'll just read a quote from State Representative Paul Wagner. He actually serves Reno and McPherson County, and he said he believed the email may have come from transgender activists. And he said, here's a quote that was interesting: "They were the most negative, hateful email that we received all session." And you think about that, there's other groups as well, but when you get those negative emails, I guess, how does that affect what goes on in the process?
Well, I think you have to take all of them kind of at their face value. I think it's a lot like with an entertainer. Do you read every critic, or do you just those that think you might agree with you? Some of the issues that we get involved in, I feel maybe bad for those that help us during the session. because they get the brunt of a phone call, and somebody may call and just chew them out, and it's hard to write that down on a piece of paper of how angry or disappointed, whatever they are. So I always ask for their phone number and try to call them back. I think a one-on-one situation is a lot better. Now, I am not going to speculate, who it might or might not be, because one, I'm not going to give any of the, if it's a group or anybody, that sort of credit. I think it goes back to the days of Paul Harvey, when he would say certain things on the radio about somebody that did something, and he would always say, well, the person would love for me to give them their name out for notoriety, and I won't do that. And so I guess that's what I'm looking at. I mean, I know there's some groups that are upset with some of the votes that were taken and the results. And, I think it'll work itself out. But in talking to my colleagues, and many of us were on the phone with each other, did you get, again, not knowing, Gary, as this all developed, we didn't know that it was going to be sent to, to basically all the Republican legislators, and it just kept going and going. And they weren't all received on Friday. Some were out of town. Some had a PO box, and so this was an evolving thing. And like I said, law enforcement, Bureau of Investigation, Attorney General Kobach. I mean, everybody was involved in it, but it was a constant update of knowing what was going on. Probably the biggest thing, Gary, that's upsetting is the amount of resources, time, and dollars that were spent.
And
the
still
sheriff,
being spent. Still being spent.
Still being spent. The sheriff, undersheriff, a couple of KBI agents, somebody from the squad to take the powder out of my house. They drove. I mean, I'm over an hour away from Hayes. So, you have to, I mean, it's a trip to get to my house. And so all that, and it was Friday night. They left my house at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. And so after being there most of the afternoon, and still had to go home to their families and, and do their job with all this uncertainty of not knowing what was going on. And so that was really what's disappointing and frustrating, is if you're trying to make a point, well, did you really? We've had different groups in our town halls in Hayes that have been there, been loud and vocal, been trying to be intimidating, and we just have to move on. We'll give them the opportunity to say their piece, but once that is done, we also represent many more constituents. We can have conversations, but hopefully we're not in a position to where they're uncomfortable and vice versa.
Well, Ken, I know the program's about forward ever, so we want to look forward as much as just wanted to understand what all happened, because when you read it, listen to it, hear it on the news, it's one thing. But when you know somebody, like I know you and other legislators that are a part of this, it's like all of a sudden it gets a lot closer to home. So I wanted to understand that a little better, and thank you for sharing. I want to take a quick break and come back, because leadership just keeps right on moving. And I wanted to kind of hear what you're hearing while you're out doing some of your community sessions. Our guest today is State Representative Ken Rahjes. He'll be back and talk about what's going on in the state of Kansas after this.
The most successful investors are those that can keep their emotions in check and take a longer-term view at what portfolios will be worth 3 to 5 years down the road. I'd say that's the most important in determining what investor outcomes are. Market corrections will continue in the future. We've seen many of them over the years, only to see equity prices rise higher, and that'll be the case in the future.
Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Welcome back to Forward Ever. We've been talking about some interesting things in leadership. One of those things is to look forward and make sure you're tackling the issues going forward. Our guest is State Representative Ken Rahjes. And Ken, what are you hearing when you're out on the trail talking to people in rural Kansas communities?
Well, a lot of people are asking what's going to happen in the session. And I said, well, it's still early. We're just done a few weeks ago. We've got a couple of more months, but we're doing a lot of things in the off session as far as getting things lined up for next year. But a lot of folks are concerned about this economy. We continue to see tax receipts up in Kansas. So Kansas is still kind of an outlier. of things, but we also know agriculture is one of the driving forces. We have some concern with this year's wheat crop that just is pretty much, I won't call it a failure, but getting close in many areas. So that is a concern. The rain is now fallen, which is going to be a big help, but people are concerned of when that other shoe, in a sense, is going to drop, maybe with the national economy and when we get brought into that. You know, we have made good strides, I think, in the last session to do some things with mental health and other things. Still looking at ways to create jobs and make people feel good about their opportunities, and so that, in a sense, is a good thing. From my standpoint, I'm chairman of the Agriculture Committee. We've had discussions about moving forward with industrial hemp. There's a lot of challenges there, but I think we're going to get to a point where all parties can agree, and we'll be able to move forward. It's a long process. There are a number of things. We've got the right to repair that some states have talked about, to give farmers and maybe those good old shade tree mechanics or independent mechanics the ability to have access to work on machinery, tractors and those with computers. And so we're looking at maybe something like that. The other thing that I'm the vice chair of a special committee that's going to be looking at foreign ownership of agriculture land. We talked a little bit about it last session, but it really didn't go too far based on kind of what we knew at the time. And so we're going to do another couple of day deep dive into that and see if there's something that can go there. Primarily, we're looking at China and the impact that could have here in Kansas from not only a security standpoint, but a food security standpoint. So, overall, I think people are Kansas and the ones that I talk to, are feeling fairly good. We're still doing a lot of good things, and I think the biggest thing, Gary, that happened when El Nino came and brought some moisture, that changed a lot to a lot better attitude.
Well, Ken, that's my last question for you. You run a family farm. You're a part of what goes on up there in Northwest Kansas. You not only represent us, but there's a business aspect to that. How are you doing on your farm?
Well, it's one, Gary, that's definitely another year of challenges. Some of these rains probably obviously were too late for most of the wheat, but when it did come, some of that later planted wheat's going to come around. We're going to have a little wheat. Right now, corn and beans look very good, but we only the last couple of years, August has turned off and been very, very dry. Grass for cattle has been probably one of the biggest challenges. In fact, I talked with one extension agent just recently and about what was some of these abandoned wheat acres, what was going to happen. And we saw more oats, say, in Phillips County, but a lot of areas are going with cane or some sort of feed for their cattle because the grass has been so short. We're not going to have a very long season in grass, and so. But again, with the change in this weather has helped. I've been long concerned with the mental health aspect, and of course, in rural areas and agriculture, is something we don't like to talk about, and trying to work with the folks at the Department of Agriculture with their ag stress. KansasAgstress.org is a one that just kind of is a first stop. If you have questions, you need to talk to somebody. I mean, we know it's very, very stressful. And the challenges are there, the interest rates where they are. I mean, that's the other thing you got to look at. I mean, Gary, it's been a couple of decades, probably I guess 4 decades, back in the days when we had extremely high interest rates, but we've had so low for so long. 3 to 5% is quite a bit for many folks that weren't used to those 18 and 20%. So overall, I guess I'll say this. We have one alfalfa field that made more its first cutting than it did all of last year. So that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Ken, thanks for your leadership. I know it has been challenging, and it will continue to be as divisive as many people are, and we are in general as a voting community, so to speak. Thank you for serving us. Thank you for leading during challenging time, and thank you for taking a few moments to talk to us today.
Gary, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Our guest today is State Representative Ken Rahjes, representing the 110th District in the state of Kansas. Obviously challenging times, but I want to thank you for listening, thank you for participating, and thank our sponsor, Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.